أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah everybody, and welcome back after a little short break we had to Mizan Live. We ended with, alhamdulillah, we were able to end the first two parts of the book that we are covering in these are sessions, the book of Doctrines of Shia Islam of Ayatollah Subhani. And we finished Tawheed, we finished Nubuwwah Khasa, Nubuwwah Amma, which is prophethood, general prophethood, specific prophethood of our prophet. And we made our way all the way up to the beginning of the chapter on Imamah and Khilafah, which is going to be article 83 onwards, inshallah ta'ala. And as I said before we ended about a month ago, I said that, as Muharram begins and as we enter Muharram, well, right now it's the first of Safar actually, today I think was the first of Safar, or the second of Safar. So as we restart this whole thing, these sessions that we're having, we will be starting with Imamah as well. So it's an interesting coincidence. Imamah, of course, as you all know, is something that is a topic that is where the splits will take place. When it comes to Tawheed, Nubuwwah, there isn't too much difference of opinion, although if you go into detail there might be some differences of opinion between the Shia school, theological Shia schools, and the Sunni Shia theological schools. You'll have some differences there as well, but that's when you go into really deep details. When it comes to this Imamah, and the same thing with prophethood, when it comes to Imamah and Khilafah though, of course that is where most of the ikhtilaf is. So ikhtilaf in Khilafah, regarding Khilafah, that's where it all happens usually, and there's lots of discussions there, and unfortunately it has been the means of division and sometimes unnecessary tension as well. So we want to talk about that, inshallah. Try to keep things as respectful as possible. To discuss these matters doesn't mean that you have to necessarily disparage everyone else who is against what you believe in and so on. And that's what we try to practice as we teach these articles regarding Imamah and Khilafah. But at the end of the day, these things are discussed because they have to do with our beliefs, and each school of thought will have their reasons to believe in what they believe in. So having said that and a little introduction there, let's begin. Ayatollah Subhani, in his book, he starts with a little introduction and then he gets into the articles related to this chapter. He says about three things in the introduction to this whole chapter. He says, number one, when the Holy Prophet passed away after 23 years, it's not like everything that he was responsible for and all the responsibilities that he had, they all of a sudden ended. Yes, there are some responsibilities that were peculiar to him only, and that was receiving revelation and also transmitting that revelation and passing it on to the people. But after revelation stopped and there was no need for revelation anymore, it doesn't mean that the need for other things also ends as well. No, he had other responsibilities too. As a result of that, you have to have somebody to continue this legacy of the Holy Prophet and to make sure to preserve the deen and religion in face of all the hardships that might and all the challenges that might come its way. And this is something Ayatollah Subhani, he says, it's something that everyone believes in. Shia and Sunni, everybody believes that the Prophet, after he passes away, there are going to still be some responsibilities. Somebody, right, has to step up and take the burden and try to take Islam towards its final destination of ultimate felicity for mankind. So to preserve it. And so this is something everyone agrees on, he says, but of course this is where also there will be some disagreement regarding some details here. Number one, for example, what are the characteristics of a person who is going to succeed the Prophet? Number one. And number two, how is this person identified and how is this person chosen? So these are two matters that usually there's a major difference of opinion on. So having said that introduction, we move on into the actual discussion, which is article number 83 of the book of Ayatollah Subhani. He starts talking about what Shia means in lexicon, and he says, as you all know, Shia means follower. We have a verse in the Quran, وَإِنَّ مِنْ شِيعَتِهِ لَإِبْرَاهِيمَ, that of the Shia of Prophet Nuh was Ibrahim alayhi salam. Now some people use this verse to prove that Shiism is the right way to go. Why? Because there's a word in the Quran that says Shia. No. This just shows that this term has some roots, has a meaning, and it has also been used in the Quran. But does that necessarily mean that this, just because a word comes in the Quran, now it proves any concepts that might have that same term to describe them? No. Alright. So he says that, and this is what we're about to talk about is something that, I feel that there's a lot of mistakes we have regarding this. And that is, when did this term actually come into the picture? When was it part of Islam, this term of Shia, followers of Ali? Of course, the Shia will believe for sure it was after the Holy Prophet, right after the Holy Prophet might have passed away, because they believe that they have to follow Ali ibn Abi Talib as the successor of the Holy Prophet. Now, some Shia will take it a step further as well, and they'll have reason for this, and they'll say no, like Ayatollah Subhani and others, and we can say this is mainstream Shiism, that no, Shiism was there from the Prophet's time even, and this is something that the Prophet had promoted amongst the people, amongst the Muslims during his lifetime even. So that's one point he makes. Another point he makes is that there were people that had surrounded Imam Ali alayhi salam during the time of the Prophet as well, who had been identified and labeled as the Shia of Ali. Yes? And so he starts he says, I'll bring you 3 examples of great Sunni scholars who have brought this up. That during the Prophet's time there was a group of people who were referred to as the Shia of Ali. Yeah, during the Prophet's time, even before he passed away. He brings 3, but 2 out of these 3, unfortunately, in my opinion, they fall short of what he's claiming, what Ayatollah Subhani is claiming. The first one is good. He says, a person by the name of Nawbakhti. One writer, Nawbakhti, writes as follows: the word Shia is a term referring to those who in the time of the Prophet of God sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and after him, regarded Ali as the rightful Imam and Caliph, breaking away from others and attaching themselves to him. Alright, so Nawbakhti is saying in the time of the Prophet and after. Right? So Nawbakhti is a person who writes about Milal and Nihal, they call it, which has to do with, because in history we've had people who wrote about the different denominations and different religions. One of them is Nawbakhti, apparently. Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari. So that was the first one. Nawbakhti was the first one. But then 2 more he brings here. Ayatollah Subhani doesn't really imply what he's claiming. That, yeah, look, I have some scholars who say that Shiism was there even during the Holy Prophet's time. So he says, Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari says, the reason why this group is called Shia is because they were followers of Ali, giving him precedence over the other companions. I don't know how this implies that Shiism was there even before the demise of the Holy Prophet. Number 3, al-Shahristani. Shahristani, which is famous. He's famous for Milal and Nihal. He writes in regards to denominations and religions also. He writes, the word Shia refers to those who followed Ali in particular, believing that he had been designated as heir, Imam, and Caliph by the Prophet. So once again, this does not imply, brothers and sisters, that Shiism was there during the Prophet's time. It implies that it happened after. They said he's the heir. He was appointed by the Prophet to be the heir and successor. And so, this idea of it is something that we have major Sunni scholars say that Shiism existed during the Prophet's time. He brought 3 examples for that, but only 1 out of 3 of them was, I feel really explicitly was saying that. The other 2, I didn't see how that was implying that. So anyway, this is not too important though, brothers and sisters. It's not too important. You know what the problem is, brothers and sisters, right now, I can tell you is that the problem is that when you look into mainstream, when you look into scholars and speakers from the other schools of thought, when they speak about Shiism, it's a little worrying. Why? Because they make it seem like Shiism started way later after the demise of the Prophet, not after the demise of the Prophet, right after, directly after. No. Some even go as far as the battles of Imam Ali's time, or to the time of Uthman's death. Some even, and I've seen this, and they are PhDs from universities here even, they say the theological school of Shiism started after the death of Imam Hussein. So that was like very crazy to me. I was like, wow, how could you say such a thing? Like, this person, you have to be impartial, and you have to, you are in Western academia. Western academia will not appreciate the fact that you are speaking out of whim like this. This is something that needs proof, and there's no proof for this. Yes, some people will say during the death of Uthman and the assassination of Uthman, this happened by a person by the name of Abdullah bin Saba. He's the one who started this whole thing, and he was a Jew, and he was trying to get rid of Islam, etc., etc. The Shia will have responses to that, of course. But that's as far out as I've heard it. I've never heard anything after that. But just recently I was listening to a lecture, well, he's not a lecturer, he's a scholar, with as I said, he's a PhD from here, and when he was speaking about it, he took it all the way there. I was very surprised, to be honest. So that is what is worrying. Now let's say, okay, let's just concede to the fact that, okay, Shiism wasn't there during the Prophet's time, but what's for sure is that the Shia school believes that there's enough proof to show that Shiism was there right after the demise of the Prophet. So having said all of that, we move on. He says, some people will tell you that Shiism was the result of, I don't know, Saqifa, or the killing of Uthman, and all of that, as I just alluded to. And then he says three things here to refute this. Number one, he says that no. It was there in the beginning, either after the Prophet's demise or even during the Prophet's time. Why? Number one, he brings three reasons. Number one, he says that a group of the Ashab and companions of the Holy Prophet, the big ones, some of them, the Prophet called them Shia. Of course, he doesn't bring references for this. Okay, unfortunately, he should, but as I've said again and again, this is just a concise book of our beliefs, and some articles that have to do with what we believe in. That's about it. It's not a book that is to be seen as a very academic work in the sense of citations and references. He'll bring lots of references, but sometimes he doesn't. So he says, look, for these three reasons, I'm going to tell you that no, even during the Prophet's time, the Shiism existed. Why? Because the Prophet had named some of his own companions that were great companions as Shia. Like who? Like Salman al-Farsi, like Abu Dhar al-Ghifari, and so on. That's number one reason. Number two reason that Shiism existed during the Prophet's time, he says that we have some verses of the Quran, and he brings one of them here, where mufassirs and commentators of the Quran have explained how they've brought hadiths that explain how this verse has to do with the Shia of Imam Ali during the Prophet's time. The Quran was revealed during the Prophet's time, yes? So the Prophet has interpreted these verses and identified the instances of these verses as the Shia of Ali. So what is that verse? إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمْ خَيْرُ الْبَرِيَّةِ Surah Bayyinah. That those who believe and do righteous deeds, those are the best of creation and the best of people. The hadith says that what is meant by this is who? Is Ali and his Shia. The hadith says. And so he says that this can be found in the famous book of Ad-Durr al-Manthur, which is the tafsir book of As-Suyuti, which of course is of the Sunni school of thought. So that's his claim. I haven't checked this directly to see what Suyuti exactly says, but according to Ayatul Subhani, Sunni commentators of Quran even have said that this verse was revealed regarding the Ali ibn Abi Talib and the Shia of Ali. That the Prophet said this has to do with them. Okay, clearly, if the Prophet has said this, that means that there was a Shiism back then. This is what Ayatollah Subhani is saying. There was a Shiism during the Prophet's time. That's his claim. Okay. That was the second reason. Third reason. He says that in the history books, we find that even right after the demise of the Holy Prophet, we will find names of companions, and not even just companions, but tabi'een as well. Followers, those who came after the Sahaba, who never saw the Prophet but saw the Sahaba. Yes? We don't have this categorization too much in Shiism. This is something that is more prominent in the Sunni school of thought. Our brothers and sisters in the Sunni school will categorize. They will say that we have Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet, those who saw him when they were Muslim, while they were Muslim, so they will be categorized as Sahaba of the Holy Prophet. Although there is some difference of opinion there as well as exactly who a Sahabi is, how much time he spent with the Prophet. But anyway, the bare minimum is that they've seen the Prophet in a time where they were Muslim. Number one. And then they will also have a category by the name of tabi'een, those who didn't see the Prophet but saw the companions and the Sahaba of the Prophet. We might use this categorization sometimes, but it's not something that comes out of our hadiths necessarily. There's nothing wrong with it either in that sense. So anyway, he says that in history books we will find names of these Sahaba and tabi'een who believed in the Khilafah and the immediate successorship of Imam Ali alayhi salam after the Holy Prophet. And he says, I can't mention their names here. Okay? So these are three reasons that, look, Shiism was there from the start, and that it's not something that came about later as a result of the assassination of the third Khalifa, or I don't know, after some things that happened in Saqifa and stuff like that. He says no, it was there right after the Holy Prophet passed away, maybe even before that as well. Alright, so having said that, that's Article 83. He moves on to Article 84. In Article 84, we're talking about now, we're getting a little more serious. Up to now, brothers and sisters, in my opinion, it was all warm-up. We were just warming up, nothing too special there. But now, a few points are made that I think are of the utmost importance, and especially for us Shi'is and Sunnis living today in this world and trying to coexist and get along and be united when it comes to the Quran and the Kaaba and the Lord and the Prophet that we all share. For us, I think it should come down to this. We want to talk about what the reasoning for the Shia and their belief is. There's two ways to approach this. Number one is that you make it all about the texts. What did the texts say? Who did the Prophet appoint, etc., etc., and all that stuff. Eid al-Ghadir, for example, or the event of Ghadir. Some will call it an Eid, some will not call it an Eid. What did the Prophet say there? All the other things during those last months or weeks of the Holy Prophet's life where the Prophet said certain things about certain people, we'll want to talk about that. They'll want to discuss that. Some will say we're not convinced that the Prophet, what he said means that he has an immediate successor like Ali. Others might believe otherwise, and so on and so forth. So sometimes you can approach it like this. Go to the text, see what you find in the text. Sometimes though, sometimes no. What you do is, you don't keep it to the text. You want to move back a step first. And say, let's assume there's no text to begin with. Think about it, brothers and sisters. Let's just say no text whatsoever other than the Quran had reached us. What other means can we use to reach a conclusion that, hey, the Prophet has to have appointed somebody after him? Then we can go argue over who it was. But as you all know, brothers and sisters, I have to say this. Mainstream Shia says the Prophet appointed somebody. Mainstream, if I'm not mistaken, inshallah I'm not mistaken, but so far out of all the things we've read and heard and listened to, it seems that mainstream Sunnism will hold that the Prophet did not appoint anyone after him. And he left it to the Ahlul Khibra, or the Ahlul Halli wal Aqd, those experts that were of his companions, for them to figure out who is to succeed him. Okay? That's what it seems mainstream Sunni Islam will hold today. Yes, we will also have some who will go a step further in the Sunni school and will say that no. Not only did the Prophet not appoint somebody, but the Prophet appointed Abu Bakr as his first Khalifa, and they'll bring textual proof for that. But as I said, this doesn't seem to be too mainstream. That itself has a different discussion. Right now what we have is the Shia mainstream versus Sunni mainstream. What is each saying? One is saying that the Prophet appointed, and he appointed Ali ibn Abi Talib after him. The other side will say, no, the Prophet didn't even appoint anybody and left it to those who are experts after him. Ahlul Halli wal Aqd. For them to figure out who is to lead the Muslims after the Holy Prophet and to preserve this faith after the Holy Prophet. Of course, we believe Imamah doesn't just mean preservation of the deen, it's more than that. But anyway, alright, so because of this, these two sides and what they're saying, Ayatollah Subhani starts his discussion like this. If one side says there was an appointment, another side says no, there was no appointment by the Holy Prophet, he left it to the masses, he left it to the people. Ayatollah Subhani wants to discuss that, look, let's just assume there's no texts at all for us to work with, and that the Prophet, is it possible to even say that the Prophet would leave this world without appointing anyone as his successor? That's the question he wants to address. Does it even make sense? What we know, the Prophet that we know, does it even make sense for him to leave this world and not appoint somebody to take his place after him? Okay. For that, I want to read a little bit. This is on page 99, article 84. It says, it seems clear that an intellectual evaluation would proceed along the following lines. Okay, so he wants to make it an intellectual discourse here. He wants to say, hey, forget all the texts, forget the hadith, forget what man kuntu mawlah means in hadith of Ghadir, forget about hadith al-manzila, anta minni bimanzilati Haruna min Musa. Put all of these things aside. Let's just see what the intellect says. One side says he must have appointed somebody. Another side says no, he didn't appoint. He left it to others to figure it out. He wants to see if this even makes sense rationally and intellectually. So that's where he's taking the argument. Inshallah, it's clear. He says it seems clear that an intellectual evaluation would proceed along the following lines. He says, if a great reformer struggled earnestly for many long years and arrived at a plan that would benefit human society, meaning Islam, it is natural that in order that his plan continue to be implemented after his death, so as to bear fruit in the long term, he would seek some effective way of perpetuating the system he had established. Or to put it differently, it is not conceivable, it doesn't make sense, that a person should take great pains to construct some great building and then leave it completely unprotected, appointing no watchmen or supervisors to maintain and preserve it. So I think the argument is pretty clear. And to be honest with you, this is something that I'm always emphasizing as well. Because, brothers and sisters, the textual arguments, those arguments that are based on the text that we have in Quran and Scripture, there will always be a back and forth regarding them. Now, why did God want it to be that way? Why did God not explicitly say it? That's a different story. Maybe Ayatollah Subhani will get to it later. If something such as Khilafah and Imamah is so important, why did the Quran not mention it? Why did not the Quran mention Imam Ali's name specifically? All of that is a discussion, very important, that is still a contemporary topic discussed, although it's been there for hundreds of years. But still till today, people don't know the answers to those things because they don't read up on the answers that have been given, right? Putting all of that aside, right? We're not going to get anywhere with those because it's going to be back and forth, back and forth. It seems the starting point for this topic, for this discussion, is to go to the mind itself and just be like, okay, wait a minute. Let us think about this a little bit. The Prophet, all the painstaking efforts, all the hardship, and he is aware of all the sensitivities, all of the tribalism, all of the issues that still the Muslim Ummah suffers from. He knows it. He knows that the Aus and the Khazraj still have a rivalry amongst themselves. How many times during the Prophet's time did it happen that if the Prophet had not intervened, people would have gone back to their Jahiliyyah days and blood would have been shed again over nothing really? Why? Because the roots of and traces of the animosities were still there. You've got all these issues, brothers and sisters, amongst the Muslims themselves. Now we'll get to the outside threats as well later. The external forces that wanted to wipe out Islam, we'll get to that as well. For now we're talking internally. The Prophet knows after all this time, and the Quran would always talk about it. The Quran would scold that look at you still struggling to do the right thing amongst yourselves, to the Muslims, to the Muslim Ummah. In the Medainan surahs you'll find these things. Nifaq and hypocrisy. People who now want to eliminate Islam but in a discreet way because power is in the hands of the Prophet. All of these different things, yes, the Prophet is aware of. And he knows the only reason why things are not just crumbling down is because of his presence, because of his existence. And then he's going to leave this world without appointing anybody so that at least people don't fight over who the next person was to be. It just doesn't make sense. The Prophet that we know, the Prophet that would appoint somebody to take his place when he would leave Medina for battles, or leave Medina for whatever business he had, for him not to appoint somebody after he's leaving this world. It just doesn't make sense, brothers and sisters. I think that's where the argument should start. Not, oh, let's go see what Hadith of Ghadir says, because everyone will have an answer to that. And it'll go back and forth until the Day of Judgment. Not Hadith of Manzala, or other hadiths that we will get to, of course. We will get to verses of the Quran and hadiths that the Shia will also reference to support their ideology. We'll get to that as well. But before that, I think to solidify this understanding, this ideology, one has no choice but to go back, sit down, put everything aside, put the Quran, put the hadiths aside, and think to themselves a little bit first before getting into those texts. That, hey, what kind of Prophet did we have? What kind of people did he have? Yes? And what kind of problems could arise after the Prophet would pass away? And then once you think about all these things, you think to yourself, does it make sense for such a Prophet who has such people, who knows that such problems can arise, to leave this dunya without caring about what happens after, without appointing somebody to take care of it after? Someone might say, well, he left it for the experts to figure out after him. Well, wouldn't it have been better at least for him to say something? And that's why I really respect the ones who, they're a minority, they're a very small minority, but you will find some scholars who are not Shia today who will say that yes, the Prophet did say Ali's name as his successor, but others felt that, this is just his suggestion. And they felt that, if the Prophet passes away, if they identify somebody else as a better choice, then he can be the one. Right? At least some people will say, will go this far. But really, brothers and sisters, it doesn't seem to make sense, at least for me. Very humbly I say this. Once again, I mean with my limited understanding. It doesn't make sense to me that a Prophet like of this caliber of intellect, who's been blessed by Allah with isma, to not be able to understand that he has to put somebody after him. Especially, add to everything that I said so far, especially the fact that we're not talking about a building here, as Ayatollah Subhani just gave an example for. That was just an example. I'm not saying that I disagree with that example. But a building, it's not like a building that you build, okay, you know that when you pass away, you don't have any responsibility towards that building. Others are going to come take it over, do whatever. Okay, it has to do with this worldly life. We're talking about Islam here, and the survival and protection of Islam in its true form. Not an Islam that might be changed later as a result of not of the wrong people leading it. Yes? If somebody leads Islam who was not appointed by the Prophet, and the Prophet really had somebody else in mind, then that's the wrong person to lead that religion, to lead Islam, and that can end in very bad results and have bad outcomes. One of them being Islam, only a name of Islam remaining, or Islam getting wiped out totally after 50, 100, 200 years. So this is not your normal everyday thing that you're like, okay, even if I die, they'll figure it out, whatever. No. We're talking about Islam. We're talking about the final religion. We're talking about that which is to secure everybody's hereafter and akhirah. That's what we're talking about. So, the people that the Prophet was dealing with, the Prophet himself, the problems that he could have guessed will arise later after him, and this is Islam we're talking about. All of these things come together, and one thinks like intellectually, hey, it doesn't make sense for him not to appoint anyone. So right here, this idea and notion of those who say he must have appointed somebody versus those who say no, he didn't appoint anybody, this idea of him not appointing anybody goes out the window, in my opinion, just with this little bit of intellectual reflection and endeavor that one exercises. They'll come to the conclusion that, okay, I can't follow the ones who say, and I don't agree with the ones who say the Prophet would leave this world without appointing anybody. But yeah, then we'll have to see, well, if he did appoint somebody, who was it? Some will say it was Abu Bakr, some will say Ali ibn Abi Talib. We'll have to see what their reasons are. But as I said before, mainstream non-Shia Islam, from what I understand so far, is that the Prophet left this dunya without appointing, and he left it to those who were to come after him, to decide, who were living after him. This, brothers and sisters, Ayatollah Subhani, he says, it doesn't make sense. So let me continue reading here. He says, the Holy Prophet is one of the greatest persons in human history who, by bringing forth a new religious dispensation, or religion, effected a profound transformation in the world, laying the foundations of an entirely new global civilization. Evidently, this exalted individual, through whom an eternally valid religion was established, and who provided leadership to his own society, must have made it clear how this religion was to be preserved, how it was to be protected against the dangers and misfortunes that might confront it. He must also have said something about how the everlasting Muslim Ummah should be led and administered, and he must have indicated the qualities of leadership that should prevail after his passing away. In this light, it is inconceivable, it doesn't make sense, that he would first establish a religion that was to last till the end of time, and then fail to provide clear guidance as to how the leadership of that religion after his death was to be determined and organized. Sometimes I get the feeling, brothers and sisters, that this idea that was just presented in Article 84, which is super important, in my opinion, and that's where the discussions need to start instead of Hadith of Ghadir. That's something that will come also, and that itself is powerful, but this intellectual side of things is also super important. Sometimes I feel that those who are not of the Shia school of thought, the people out there, they will come to this conclusion themselves sometimes as well. They'll think about it, they'll be like, yeah, it just doesn't make sense for this to be the case. Then why is it that they don't go around looking to see if there is anything out there other than the mainstream narrative today? I think the answer is pretty clear. People either don't have the time for such research, or they just don't want to get out of their comfort zone. It's uncomfortable, brothers and sisters, to look into minorities versus the majority, to go against mainstream sometimes, you know? Usually, people are more comfortable when they are the majority. And it's fine. And if really they are not guided to the straight path, because they were so scared that they didn't think that the truth would be there, then that's between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if someone really, these questions comes to their mind and they don't look into it and they slack off, then they might be held responsible on the Day of Judgment. So that's something very, very important, I think. Allah might not hold people responsible when it comes to texts and not understanding them and not knowing exactly what was meant by what the Prophet said when he said "Wan kuntu mawla," for example. But Allah has given, as our hadith tell us, He's given us all an inner messenger. As a matter of fact, I think the hadiths refer to the intellect and the mind as the greater messenger. So prophets came, they're the minor messengers. The major messenger is what Allah has given us in our mind. And the mind that He's given us, So if the mind is pushing you in a certain direction, hey, you need to look into this, but you slack off, then that can really bring about some major responsibility and accountability later. He says again, it is inconceivable that a prophet who did not withhold his guidance as regards even the smallest question pertaining to human welfare should have neglected to provide guidance on such a crucial matter as the leadership of Islamic society, thus leaving the Muslims to their own understanding, not knowing what their obligations were in regard to this fundamental issue. It is therefore impossible to accept the proposition that the Prophet departed from this world without having given any instructions regarding the leadership of his community after his death. Yeah. That's Article 84. Article 85 now expands even more on this idea. Once again, it's something that's common sense and has to do with intellect. It's not something that has to do with texts. Article 85 now wants to add to Article 84. What did Article 84 say to us? Article 84 said, look, all you need to do is sit down and think a little bit, look at the situation of the Muslims, and figure out that the Prophet won't leave these people to themselves. So the internal matters of the Muslims is enough of a reason for the Prophet not to leave this world without letting them know what they need to do after him. Internal affairs. Article 85 now wants to add more to this equation and say that there are also external matters. Yes? External matters that really make it they make it really wajib on the Prophet to explain to the people who is supposed to take his place after him. So that instead of fighting amongst themselves to figure that out, and then the external elements that want Islam wiped out can just have an easier job wiping them out, instead of arguing amongst themselves and fighting amongst themselves, yeah, they can be prepared for those external threats. Okay? That's what Article 85 is saying now. Okay. What are those external threats? He calls it a triangle. A triangular threat. What does that mean? That means there's three problems we have here. He says, if we consider the history of this foundational religion of Islam or epoch of Islam and take into account the regional and global context, at the death of the Prophet, the necessity of appointing someone to the position of Imam will be readily apparent. Why is that so? Because after the Prophet's death, Islam faced a threefold threat. We have a triangle right now of what? Of threats. What is that? On the one side, there was the Byzantine Roman Empire. On another was the Sassanid Persian Empire. And from within there was the danger posed by the group known as the hypocrites, the munafiqeen. So I put the munafiqeen in the internal problems. He brings it into the external. At the end of the day, we have three enemies. So the way Ayatollah Subhani does it is, in Article 84, he's talking about those who liked Islam, liked the Prophet, but still had some grudges maybe, had some issues, had some tribalism in them. He says because of that, that would be enough for the Prophet to appoint somebody after him. Then he takes it out to the enemies of Islam. So that's how he's dividing it up. I made it internal and external. He makes it those who are in favor of Islam, adherents of Islam, versus enemies of Islam. Enemies of Islam, he says, is threefold. The Byzantine Empire, the Persian Empire, and the munafiqeen, the hypocrites. Yes. So he says, as regards the first threat, so he talks about the Byzantine Roman Empire. He's just illustrating to us how big a threat these all were. He says, as regards the first threat, suffice to note that the Prophet was concerned about And he was concerned about it right up to his last days, mobilizing a large contingent of Muslims under the command of Usama bin Zayd to confront the Romans, despite the protests of those who were opposed to such a move. Brothers and sisters, the Prophet knows he's passing away. The Muslims know the Prophet is passing away. What does the Prophet do? In those final days of his life, when everyone wants to be around the Holy Prophet, no one wants to leave the city because they know the Prophet is going to pass away, and people are upset that the Prophet wants them out of the city. Why? Because the Byzantine Empire is such a big threat. The Prophet sends such an army under the command of Usama bin Zayd to go and fight the Byzantines. How important does this show that the threat, how big a threat this was? Yeah. How big a threat does this show the Byzantine Empire was? That the Prophet, who knows people love him so much, that they want to be around him in his final days, he says, no, 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 go out and fight the Byzantines, because they are a threat. And they had fought them, and they had lost the battles, and they had come back. Actually, the Prophet had sent them again under the command of Usama bin Zayd. People didn't like that. And history tells us that people objected to the Holy Prophet and were, putting it off and procrastinating and going to fight. And as a matter of fact, in the end, eventually this army, before the Prophet actually passed away, they didn't go. It was only after the Prophet passed away, right, that this army that kind of made it to the outskirts of Medina but never went to the Romans, they came back. Abu Bakr now sent them again to go fight the Byzantines, right? So they never eventually went after the Prophet, before the Prophet passed away. They didn't. But the point that we're trying to make here is, Ayatollah Subhani is trying to make here is that, listen, one of those major threats, and it was such a major threat that the Prophet didn't pass away until he sent an army out to fight them, was the Roman Empire. That's a big threat. That's how big it was. Number one. Number two. As for the second threat, the Sassanid emperor, the Persian emperor, was clearly a malicious enemy who, having torn up the letter sent to him by the Prophet, himself wrote a letter to the governor of Yemen, instructing him either to capture the Prophet or send to him his severed head. This is the Persian Empire. So these guys ain't no friends of the Muslim Ummah, of Islam. So they're just waiting for the right time maybe to get rid of this extra player now in this whole game of that region of power and the power struggle in that region. The Persian Empire doesn't want this growing religion, and this religion that is becoming stronger and stronger by the day, doesn't want them there. It has enough problems with the Roman Empire. So of course the Persian Empire, who orders the governor of Yemen to send the severed head of the Prophet to them, yeah, of course this empire is going to be a threat to the Muslim Ummah. Number two. Number three. As for the third enemy, these persons had always been causing trouble for the Prophet in Medina and elsewhere. Their various plots being so many thorns in his side, their schemes are mentioned in various places in the Quran. Yes, the Quran speaks about them a lot. Indeed, an entire surah, one in which their evil thoughts and actions are commented upon, is named after them. Surah Munafiqun, we all know. Now it might be asked, so now Ayatollah Subhani, he wants to draw a conclusion here. Just like he drew a conclusion in Article 84. Here in Article 85 he says, now it might be asked, in the face of this triple danger, with enemies ready to ambush the Muslims from all sides, would the Holy Prophet have left the religion of Islam and the Muslim community without a leader, leaving the Muslims without any clear guidance? Brothers and sisters, someone might misunderstand what he's saying here and think that the Prophet is that the Ayatollah Subhani is saying that the Prophet needed to appoint someone after him so they can go fight the Persians, the Romans, and to uproot the hypocrites of Medina. No, that's not what he's saying. He's saying, look, does it make sense with all the internal issues that the Prophet has, or the Muslim Ummah has amongst themselves? One. And to the external enemies of Islam, does it make sense for the Prophet to leave without giving guidance in this regard, so that the Muslims can have more and more and more and more division amongst themselves? Yes? And fighting each other. weakening the Muslim Ummah to the point that these threats actually feel like now we can actually take over the Muslims and defeat them and destroy them, wipe Islam out. That's what he's trying to say apparently. This should also be considered, he says. There is no doubt that the Prophet understood that the life of the Arabs was dominated by tribal loyalty, with members of a tribe seeing their own lives as bound up with that of their chief. Thus, leaving the task of appointing a leader to such tribesmen could only lead to factional disputes and inter-tribal rivalry, allowing the enemies of Islam to take advantage of the divisions opened up in the ranks of the Muslims. It is on this basis, precisely, that Ibn Sina writes. So he quotes Ibn Sina, which mainstream Shiism does not see him as Shia. That Ibn Sina writes, the appointment of a successor by means of explicit designation, nas, by the Prophet is closer to the truth. That's what he quotes Ibn Sina saying. For by such designation, every kind of dispute and opposition is uprooted. So he says it makes sense. Now, does he believe that the Prophet did do that though? No, maybe not. But people who came after the Prophet apparently are saying that it just makes more sense that the Prophet would do such a thing. And the Shia school, that's what it says. It says it doesn't make sense that the Prophet wouldn't appoint someone. So he must have appointed. Let's go see what we find in the text now. Okay? It's different, brothers and sisters, to approach the text. This is important as well. I really need you to understand this point and pay attention to it. There's a big difference, brothers and sisters, big difference between a person coming to the conclusion first, intellectually, that the Prophet needs to appoint somebody after him, versus not coming to this conclusion and then approaching the text. Why do I say that? Because when you come to the conclusion that, yes, the Prophet has to have appointed someone, and then you come and look at the text actually, and what you find is that, okay, there's a lot of different things out there that have been said by the Prophet that can be interpreted in a certain way, or can be interpreted in the way that it shows that the Prophet actually appointed somebody, named him. A person who approaches these texts that might be interpreted in different ways, that can be interpreted in both ways actually, one being he appointed someone, one being no, he was just praising someone. Yeah? A person who approaches these texts with such a mentality that he should have appointed might interpret these texts differently than a person who comes to the text and says, you know what, it doesn't make sense, the Prophet doesn't have to. It makes sense, the Prophet doesn't have to appoint someone after him. And then looks at texts, and then sees that these texts can be interpreted in different ways. There's a big difference between these two. One person who approaches them, who has that mentality that the Prophet has to appoint someone after him, will find clues here and there and will add these clues up and will say, okay, this is the person that he appointed, because it doesn't make sense for him to just keep his mouth shut and not say anything. And the closest thing that I can find that mentions the names of people is the one that says Man kuntu mawla, the one that says Anta minni bimanzilati Haruna min Musa, and the one that says Anta khalifati min ba'di, and so on and so forth. These types of hadiths. The person who has that ideology, that understanding that look, the Prophet should have said something. When he comes across such text, he's like, okay, this must be it right here. Versus a person who says, no, the Prophet can leave this world and not appoint anybody after him, and it's perfectly fine. When he sees text that can be interpreted in different ways, he'll just say, okay, yeah, these are not very explicit. There are different schools of thought are arguing over these texts. So you know what? These texts are not saying anything about someone being appointed after the Prophet. Why? Why? Because he didn't have to. He didn't have to begin with. When we go to a set of verses or a set of hadiths with an understanding before them of something being necessary or not, brothers and sisters, it really helps us in understanding those texts and interpreting them. I'll give you an example. Sometimes you can be convinced before even looking at the Quran that if there is a God out there, and I'm going to end with this point by the way, if there is a God out there, he cannot be material. can't be physical. Okay? Sometimes you have this understanding. And then you see a verse in the Quran that says, Yadullahi fawqa aydihim. God's hand is above their hands. This will help you in interpreting that verse. Understanding that verse in a certain way. Why? Which means, yeah, God's hand is over their hands. Why? Because you know God can't be physical. So if the Quran says hand, it must be metaphorical here. Because if it's a real hand, real hands are physical, brothers and sisters. Right? This help versus a person who doesn't really think and doesn't have a philosophical understanding of things. And then all of a sudden will approach the verse of the Quran that says, Yadullah fawqa aydihim, God's hand is over their hands. And he'll say, okay, then God must have a hand. But you tell them, but that means that he has a physical hand if you say he has a hand. He'll be like, yeah, I don't know what kind of a hand it is, but it must be hand. Do you see how an intellectual understanding of God will shape and influence our interpretation of a verse of the Quran? Same thing with hadiths, brothers and sisters. If we have an understanding that the Prophet has to have appointed somebody after him, and then we find 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hadiths that will mention something about Ali ibn Abi Talib that he has not said about anybody else, then we'll say that, okay, that's probably what it was. Versus a person who says, no, the Prophet doesn't have to appoint anybody, and then he sees some hadiths that can be interpreted in different ways, he'll say, okay, whatever, this doesn't prove anything to begin with. Yeah, there's a lot more to say here, of course. I'm making it very basic right now, right? Even if somebody has this understanding that the Prophet must have appointed somebody after him, they might come to the conclusion that the hadiths about Abu Bakr are the ones that appoint Abu Bakr. Okay, that's a different story. As I said, we need to talk about those separately. Today, the argument was more, and the discussion was more regarding those, or we can say the mainstream understanding that either the Prophet appointed someone, which is the Shia school, versus our understanding of mainstream Sunnism. Once again, I don't want to speak on their behalf, and I might be mistaken. I'm basing this on what we always hear and see and read about of the mainstream Sunni view, that no, the Prophet didn't appoint someone and he left it to Ahl al-Halli wal-Aqd to do that. Today's discussion was more about that. Appointment versus lack of appointment. Not he appointed, but the ones who say Abu Bakr was the one appointed versus the ones who say Ali ibn Abi Talib was appointed. That itself is a different discussion. I might have repeated that a lot of time, many times. I'm sorry if I kept repeating it. I just want to make sure that this is really sunk in and absorbed by the brothers and sisters listening. Okay, I'm going to end now, but before I end, I just want to say that these lectures, I know that we put them online. We have a live stream of them as well for those who want to tune in while it's live streaming and ask their questions if they want to. Today was a little quiet, no questions were asked, but it's the beginning of the discussion. I do encourage you to ask your questions if you have any in the future. So I know that these are live streamed and these are uploaded and so on, but at the same time, I do want to let everyone know that the audio of all of these are also uploaded to the different platforms for podcasts. So Google Podcasts, Apple, Spotify, these things, we put them there because usually the best time to listen to these lectures is on the way to work and back, maybe when you're stuck in traffic, etc. Time is limited these days for people and they don't have a chance to actually tune in or watch video, and I totally understand that as well. So people ask this sometimes, not being aware that the brothers and sisters involved in this initiative of Mizan Institute, they are doing the work so that things are facilitated for those who want to follow in any way that is more convenient for them, inshallah. I thank you very much for tuning in, and we're going to continue this discussion from Article 86 from next week, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.